Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Bird, a pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. Here, we're empowering women to master midlife on their terms, reclaiming our health, our happiness, and our power. Together, we'll rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage of life, from something to dread into a beautiful, bold transition. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I am talking with Phil Weiss, founder of Apprise Wealth Management and a chartered financial analyst, certified public accountant, and registered life planner. He began his career in 1987 as a tax professional at Deloitte & Touche, and he's built a practice centered on long-term investment strategy and financial education. But the reason why I have a second male guest on the podcast, the reason why I wanted Phil on the show has less to do with his credentials and more to do with how he found his work. When his mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, Phil discovered that his father had never really handled the family's finances. He stepped in, negotiating with creditors, catching up overdue bills, and making sure his mother's medical care was covered. That experience showed him up close how quickly financial instability can compound a woman's hardest moments. It became the foundation for his life's work, helping women build financial independence before a crisis forces the issue. That's exactly the conversation I want to have today. So many women in this community are navigating midlife transitions of their own: career shifts, divorce, widowhood, caregiving for aging parents, or retirement planning that suddenly feels urgent. Financial stability isn't separate from our health during this season of life. For many of us, it's a part of it. Please welcome Phil Weiss. Thank you very much for coming. We've been talking for a little while, and I'm like, we have to hit record because this is going to be great, and we need to go. We need to get it started. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Victoria. I'm really looking forward to this. And I appreciate being only the second male to be on the show, too.
I know, it's a very coveted. I know, it was a physician that was on the show, and he was like, that's big shoes to fill. I was like, well, and I'll tell you right now, he was great. So you've got some big shoes to fit in as well. So you stepped into the lioness's den, I guess.
Okay. I'm ready.
So good. Tell me a little bit about how you went from Deloitte & Touche to founding Apprise Wealth Management.
So when I was at Deloitte, I was a tax guy, and I did all kinds of tax. I ended up specializing in international corporate tax planning, which I got very cynical about. I didn't like it anymore, and I decided it was kind of telling companies how to shuffle paper around so they could increase the size of the national debt, because there are transactions that you can do for tax purposes. That's all that really happens, and it lowers their tax bill. And so I said, that's what the impact is. So near the end of the time that I was doing that kind of work, and after I worked for Deloitte, I worked for large companies. I was writing for the Motley Fool. They used to have online portfolios, and I helped to manage one of them that they had started. And from one of the guys that I worked with, I learned about the CFA, and I decided that was my ticket out of the tax department. So I went and got my CFA, and it was my ticket out of the tax department. And first, as I transitioned while I was taking going through the CFA program, I worked for T. Rowe Price. I was a writer and an editor for them. And I finished my CFA. I'm like, okay, I want to be an analyst. I'm like, well, you got the right credentials, but you didn't get them the way our people normally get them. So you're going to have to take like 3 steps back, and we'll see what happens. And that really wasn't for me. So I wrote a research paper on a company. Through a connection, I got an opportunity. I worked for a company called Argus Research as an analyst, and I covered oil and gas stocks. So like all that stuff that's going on in the Middle East, I probably have more insight than the average person, because that was what I did for 7 years. And then there were no more growth opportunities. So I left and I went to work for another advisor. And for that advisor, my primary responsibility was really to manage the investments. Ultimately, it wasn't a good fit. And I tell people I got tired of working for idiots. So I decided to be the idiot, and I started my own firm. And so I started Apprise, and now it was not initially like I didn't know. Niching is really good in this business, but it wasn't like I said, oh, I'm going to work with women from the beginning. I thought I was going to work with healthcare professionals because I had worked, being from New Jersey, I worked with a lot of pharmaceutical companies and clients, and I knew a lot about the industry. I used to do what was called transfer pricing work, which involves doing a functional analysis of how the business works. I would talk to people all across the business, but you can't force a niche. And one day a friend of mine said to me, Phil, I think you should work with more women. And I asked her why, and she told me. I said, that kind of makes sense. And I said off the top of my head, I bet you that's like a third of my client base. It ended up, I looked, and it was somewhere between half and 2/3. It just had happened naturally. And I think that's the best way to have a niche. And then the last credential that you mentioned I have is registered life planner, which is where I bring more of the human and holistic side into it. And it really helps me get to know my clients. And when I was going through that process, I remembered that when my mother passed away, I had tried to set up a scholarship for women in her professional organization. She was an occupational therapist when she passed. It didn't really work, and I didn't have the money, and I just kind of forgot about it. And as I'm going through one of the programs during the registered life planning, I remembered that. And then life planning is experiential training. And so as I went through life planning training, that's one of my goals in my life plan, is to start a scholarship for women who go back to school later in life like my mom did. And I want to use the business to help support that.
Oh, that's fantastic. As somebody who is going back for her doctorate starting in August, I appreciate that. I'm very much later in life going back to school. And there's some challenges with that and some fears. So that's a wonderful thing to be doing. So one of the things that when I was deciding on this topic, money is an emotional thing for a lot of people. I think I would say almost everyone, right? I mean, would you agree with that? And then I also feel like, and maybe it was my upbringing, but we just didn't talk about money. Like, you don't talk about religion and you don't talk about money. Those are the two topics that are off the table. You don't talk about them. And that did not serve me personally to not talk about money, to not understand where it was going, how it works. And now that I'm in a shift and a transition and separating, I know that I'm going to be responsible for my own financial future. And figuring that out in my 40s is terrifying. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. And so why is it that women who experience these kind of shifts are looking for this kind of work that you do?
So it goes back to something that you talked about. We don't learn about money in school. There's not like courses that you take really. And I often say that you said the two things we don't talk about, right? Money and religion. We talk about sex more than we talk about money too. Like that really comes ahead of those. So it's a topic that we don't learn about, that we're afraid to talk about. And in a lot of times in any relationship, and I have couples that I work with where she's the primary money person, but there's always a primary money person. And there's not a lot of conversation about it. And so I remember when I first started, before I refined my niche a little bit, I used to say that it was that what would happen would be there would be this couple. And all through life, it's kind of the same thing that I experienced growing up in terms of he was responsible for the money and she was responsible for the kids. And then the kids get a little bit older and your life changes as your kids get older, right? Because they don't need you as much. They become more independent. Eventually they move out. And so what happened is, I viewed it as she would ask him, so I know we've been saving, because we talked about that at least, that we had to save for our future. But do we know how much we have? Do we know what we can do with it? And he'd say, I have no idea. And women generally want to plan a little bit more than men. So at that point, she would say, let's find somebody that can help us. Because the other thing you have to remember is that I just said we don't learn a lot about money, but you know what? The rules when you're accumulating money as you go through life to get to retirement are very different than the rules when you now have to start decumulation and pulling the money out of your accounts, because everything kind of switches. And so even if you understood the front side, you may not understand the back side, because we really didn't learn about that.
Yeah. I mean, it goes, I've seen parents go through retirement and other people's parents go through retirement. And there's that, like, now it's a finite resource. Now what do I do? Like, the income isn't coming in. So now where do we go? And that, I'm sure that's terrifying. And I've noticed it either becomes, I've seen some who live a little bit recklessly when they retire, and then others who completely pull back Like they do the opposite of lifestyle creep. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah, because when you've been really good at saving, it can be really hard to suddenly reverse course and say, that money, now I have to spend it, right? So I call it's a retirement paycheck. So you saved all your life so that when you got to retirement, you could use that money to pay yourself in different forms so that you could do things in retirement. But sometimes it's really hard. So that's definitely something to have a conversation with. I remember one of the first people that I worked on a financial plan with, he had been a government employee. His wife was a teacher, so they both had a pension. The government's retirement plan 401k is very generous in terms of the match. So they had, and plus you get Social Security. So like I looked, and I'm going to make up the numbers, but it was something close to this, where they said, well, we want to spend like $8,000 a month. And you look and it's like, well, you're taking in 10 or 12. And like, can we spend that much? I'm like, absolutely, please go spend more. But it's hard for us to understand that. And so, there's different components too, knowing that you have money come in. And for some people, like I don't sell products and I don't recommend annuities and things like that. But there are some times for people, like Social Security is a type of annuity. And knowing that there's something that you have coming in, at least that money is a little bit easier to spend than the other money. It's like, I'll work with people and I don't want to go into my principal, but what's it there for? And you ask your kids, I've asked mine this question, would you rather we spend some money now on things that we can do together so we can have good experiences and everything else? Or would you rather that I leave you this big pile of money when I'm gone? And the answer I get is I'd rather you spend it now. But it's really hard to get yourself there because money is, you mentioned before, like money is such an emotional topic. That's why there's behavioral economics. Like there's a whole field that talks about how we deal with our money and all the psychological aspects. And there's people that have won Nobel Prizes for their work in this area. This is a really important area.
That's interesting. I didn't know there was anything called behavioral economics. If it wasn't in the pharmacy plan. And when you talk about money, we took a pharmacy management class and that had nothing to do with personal finances. I mean, we were just kind of told you get this great package when you take a job and you max out your 401k and you just let it sit there to accumulate. And that's about it. I mean, we weren't really educated on how to utilize that money or to maximize the money. Are there things that at this point, and then there's also that, well, when I was 24, I was putting it all away and now I'm 46, what should I be doing now to maximize what I'll have when I'm in my 60s and 70s?
So there's a few things to think about here. And so from an investment perspective, you might hear about people talk about asset allocation, which is that you don't want to have all your money in the same thing. You want to have different types of investments. Like it can be U.S. and non-U.S. It could be small, medium, or large cap in terms of stocks. It could be bonds or savings or CDs versus stocks. Like that's one type of allocation. But then there's another type of allocation, which I call tax location. And so that's really having accounts that get treated differently from a tax perspective because we have different types of accounts we can put in. We can put into our taxable brokerage account or our savings account, right? And so there we get taxed currently on the earnings. And then if we sell something, if there's gain or loss, that has a tax implication. Then there's kind of the traditional 401k that most of us know about where you put money in on a pre-tax basis. It can grow tax-free, but then when you pull it out, you pay tax and you pay tax at your ordinary tax rate. Then we have a Roth IRA. And with a Roth, I put in money that's already been taxed, and then it can grow tax-free, and I can pull it out tax-free. And then you have kind of what I think of as the best of all worlds, although there's a lot of limits, so you can't put as much, is a health savings account. And people hear like, oh, health savings, like I have to use it. That's a flex spending account. That's different. A health savings account is one where there's no use it or lose it provision. You can put money in there, you can invest it, you can save it, and you can wait for years to use it. And as long as you had what the IRS calls qualified medical expenses during the time that you had that account, you can pull the money out for any reason as long as you had stuff that wasn't reimbursed in the past. So when we think about that, having different types of accounts from a tax perspective can make a really big difference because I like to think of taxes as something we want to manage over our lifetime, not in any one year. If you think about the tax rates, we have a 10% bracket, we have a 12% bracket, we have a 22, 24, et cetera. Well, if somebody said to you, I didn't pay any taxes this year, or I paid only 10% as my marginal rate, the rate I paid on my last home, that's a bad outcome, because you always, like, I don't have any clients that I would not recommend at least filling the 10 or 12% bracket. And for some, it becomes the 22 or 24, or even higher, depending upon what their situation is, because you don't want to have really low taxes one year and then you get a big tax bomb in a future year. So we want to think about taxes over our lifetime and not just on a year by year basis.
Yeah. And like thinking of the tax bomb, it makes me think of those big expenses that you don't see coming, but you still need to plan for. What are some of those things that we should be thinking that we should plan for that may not be even in our realm of thought right now?
So I think one of the biggest ones is, like, when I'm working on a couple or even an individual, doesn't matter. And we think about, okay, what do you want to do in the future? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to live? And they'll say, well, I want to stay in my house, or I want to be in another house. But remember that our health can deteriorate. Maybe we need help. And I know I've had relatives, I've had clients that have gone into things like continuing care retirement communities, where they move in and they're kind of independent. And then as their life changes, these facilities can help them take care of themselves. Because if you stay in your house, like, I know I have an older couple that I work with, I've been to their house. And the last time I went to them, I said, I know they want to stay there, but we go down the steps, and they're mid 70s to 80 years old. Is that something you're going to continue to be able to do, go up and down that steps? And they've thought about it, and they say, no, but they can live on the first floor. They don't have to go in the basement of their home. But you want to think about, if you really want to stay in your house, what modifications do you have to make to your house so that you can stay there? I know I had an aunt and uncle, when they moved out of their house and they moved into a condo of some sort or townhouse, they had the first floor modified so that they could only stay there. And then when their kids and their grandkids came, they could go upstairs, right? But they weren't going to go up the steps. And eventually they still moved to a continuing care community. But you have to think about things like that. Healthcare is a huge expense in retirement. So you want to think about how to prepare for that. It's a very big expense. So that's one of the top ones. And where we want to live. Look, I live in Maryland. The tax system here is really pretty onerous. I don't want to be here when our kids are done with school and they're settled. I don't expect to still be here, because there's that. But you don't just think about that. Like, taxes is one thing. There's cost of living. There's quality of care you can get. There's where your family and friends are and what your proximity to them is. There's what type of activities do you like, the climate. There's so many things. There's lots of factors. But I think the biggest one that people don't want to think about, just like people don't want to create a will, right? Because we all want to think about the fact that we're going to die someday. But we all are. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. So thinking, preparing for those type of things is really important. And what level of care and assistance you're going to give your kids and things like that. There's all those things that go into it.
Yeah, it's really, I was thinking about my oldest is getting ready to go to college, and she's looking at, we live in Olympia, Washington. Everything she's looking at is on the Eastern Seaboard. Like, really, could you be any farther away? But if my youngest decides that she wants to move in that direction too, do I head that way? Well, I know my parents moved out of Connecticut because retiring in Connecticut would have just that's a nail in the coffin financially. So they wanted to live closer to my smaller nephew for childcare reasons to help them out. But also, Connecticut is so expensive to live, and so that, and then healthcare wise for women's health. Right now, it's this weird situation of what states will allow specific women's health care, and having two teenagers who might want to move to different states. I'm looking at what their healthcare rights would be based on where they go to college. So there's so many compounding factors that you don't even think about when you're just living life that all of a sudden become an issue. And so one of the things that you were talking about with your aunt and uncle and an elderly couple is the situation with parents, because a lot of us are in this weird sandwich generation of having kids that we're raising, planning for college and those expenses. But then we have aging parents, and some of them have planned well and some of them have not. And we don't really know that they haven't planned well until we're in that situation of having to navigate it. So how do you navigate that when you find out your parents didn't plan financially like they should, and now all of a sudden you're helping to care for them?
It can be really hard. I think I try to encourage my clients, and sometimes I have luck with this and sometimes I don't, to have a conversation with the parents while they still can, right? You don't want to wait if you can avoid waiting till it's too late or it's like the situation's upon you. There's less that you can do. So to have those conversations ahead of time can really help. And it can help in terms of being able to provide them care and knowing what they might need and what they have and what they don't. It can also help because if there's things left when they're gone, like there's steps that you can take while they're still alive so that whatever they leave you can come to you in the best form from a tax. Again, I'll come back to that tax conversation, the tax points that I was making before. Those things really matter because if you have money in an IRA or a 401k and you pass, your heirs, unless it's your spouse, they only have 10 years to spend all that money or distribute it all. They don't have to spend it all, but they have 10 years to distribute it. And if it's in an IRA, they're going to get taxed on it every year. If it's in a Roth IRA, well, then it can sit in the account for 10 years and you can pull it out after 10 years. So if your parents are in a lower tax bracket, it might make sense for them to do things like Roth conversions. But you also want to understand, like taking care of aging parents. I mean, I remember when my mom was sick and I was working for Deloitte and they didn't really like it, but I decided that I was going to work basically 4 days a week. And then on Fridays I would take off and in the morning I would do something for me. I'd go for a bike ride or something like that. And then I'd go spend the rest of the day with my mom because I didn't think I was going to have that much more time with her. So you have to think about those. And like when you're in that caregiving situation, that first part is really important too. You got to take care of yourself because it can be really hard and really stressful. I remember when my mother-in-law died, my wife was trying to go back and forth because we used to live in New Jersey and we moved to Maryland and her mom was still in New Jersey. And there were times that she had to go back and because even though she had siblings, there were certain things that her mom needed her for. And so you want to think about things like that and understand what their plan is. Do they have a will? Do they have who their doctors are and all that thing? Make sure you have that information. And also a simple thing that we forget is how do you access their accounts? Like, right? Because there was a time when I was in between school that I lived in Arizona and I worked for the public fiduciary's office. And when I worked out for them, we were either guardian or conservator or personal representative when there wasn't a family member. And if somebody passed away, we had to go to their house and you get their mail. And that's how you found out what assets they have. Well, now, most of the time when you have accounts, it's all online. So you're not going to even know that that stuff exists, that those accounts are there. So like I encourage people to have an online password manager. I used to give them a password book that they could write everything down, but you should change your passwords, all those things happen, right? So that's not really the best thing. And if somebody finds that book or something else, guess what? Everything, but the online password managers, I think, are much better, but you want to understand how to do all that. And like, there's even things, we have all these online accounts now. And what are the plans for those accounts when you're gone? Because those things end up getting hacked and they can cause problems just after you're gone. So you want to think about, there's a lot of things to think about as part of that. I'm
like partly figuring out I need to do some things and partly terrified. Thank you. This is great. It's a great conversation. Well, and while I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about, and I had said to you before that selfishly, a lot of times the podcast guests that I have on are people I want to talk to so that I learn something myself. And I am navigating a separation. So we're not quite done yet, but when we are done, I'll need to have an understanding of what assets are mine, how to transfer things. I've heard there's a lot of tax implications and fees of shifting things. And so for those of us in the unfortunate bucket of untangling a marriage, what are some of the things that I should be doing or that we should be doing to protect as much money as we can or minimize fees?
So divorce can be an expensive process. If you can do mediation or something like that, I think that's a lot better than having an attorney from a cost perspective. When it comes to the asset themselves, like I have helped a couple, at least one or two clients with splitting the assets up. Think about them from a tax perspective. If you go back earlier, I talked about the different types of accounts and how they're taxed. Think about splitting the assets up from a tax perspective. I have one couple that I used to work with, they split. I'm still working with her. And his attorney made a big mistake. A lot of her retirement accounts were in a Roth IRA. All of his were in a regular IRA. When they split the assets, his attorney didn't realize that she had Roth assets. So she kind of split them evenly. Mm-hmm. And like, she kept all the Roth assets and got a little bit of his IRA assets. He didn't get any Roth assets. And so that means that he got all the tax bill that came with it. If you have assets in a brokerage account, it's not just the value, it's also what the cost basis is. If you're, when it comes to the house, like that's always a hard one, especially when kids are there. And one of my friends has said to me that she realized at the end of the day that she didn't need to stay in the house because the kids didn't really care where they lived. They just cared that they were with her, right? Because if you end up with a house, that's a big illiquid asset. You don't get cash, and now you're going to give up other things if you get the house. So you want to make sure that if you're going to keep that house, can you really afford it? Because it's not just the fact you're not going to get those other assets. There's also the costs that come with it. There used to be two incomes and two people contributing to that, maintaining that household. Now there's only one. Is that the right thing for you and for your family? You have to think about those things.
Yeah, it can be. I've seen some of the women who I've spoken with who've gone through the divorce process. I've talked with some who have not kept the house, and I've talked to others who kept the house. And a couple of them, they've either had to sell off and leverage other assets in order to sustain the house, or they've ended up selling it anyway. And they probably gave up a better asset in the long run to keep it, but then sell it anyway.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what can happen. Look, we get tied to our house, right? And like, it's hard if you're depending upon the age of your kids, like that's where they grew up, right? Like I said that when the last of our kids are finished with school, I don't expect to still live in this house that much longer, but for my kids, like that's going to be hard. We moved here when our oldest was 6, mm-hmm. and our daughter is our youngest. We have 4. She grew up, this is the only house she knows. And it's hard, like the idea of moving to them, like then they're not going to be able to come back to where they grew up. But there's a lot of reasons that it still makes sense, but it's a hard thing.
Yeah. There's too many emotions attached. It's not business.
Yes.
It makes it a lot harder.
It sure does.
So if I realized in my 40s that I haven't really been saving like I should or planning like I should, because I've run into women in that situation as well. What are some things that, like small things they can do right now? Because it can be terrifying to think, oh my gosh, I'm only 15, 20 years away from a retirement age and I haven't been planning at all. Is it too late, or are there things that they can course correct and have something saved up?
I always say it's never too late. It's never too early either, right? It's just, so when I do life planning, one of the purposes of life planning is to help you identify those things that matter most to you. And when you're thinking about your future and your plan, you want to make sure that those things that are really important to you matter. Like you hear the story about don't go to Starbucks and get the expensive cup of coffee. Well, if that matters to you because it's a social event and because of other reasons, then do it. Just understand that if you're doing that, there's something else you might not be able to do. I think about it. We have 4 sources of capital. It's not just money. I use an acronym TEAM. We have time, energy, attention, and money. We can use our money to buy ourselves or to free up time, to save energy, to free up our attention. So there's trade-offs involved. So you want to think about, okay, these are the things that matter to me, and these are the things that don't matter as much. When I work with somebody and they're saying, we're spending too much. Well, if we've done their life plan, so we went through, and here's the things that you said were the most important to you. The spending on those things probably needs to stay. But the spending on some of those other things that aren't on that list, that's where you cut. So like that's it. From a savings perspective, like depending upon your income, you can contribute to regular, even if you have a 401k work, you might be able to put money into an IRA or a Roth IRA or something like that. And I know people don't like the word budget sometimes. So think about a budget in kind of simple terms and make it 50, 30, 20. And when I say 50, 30, 20, 50% is for like the things you have to have your needs. So it's like to pay your mortgage or your rent, It's to pay for your food. It's to pay for your utilities. It's to pay for your car to get you to and from work, that kind of thing. Then 30% is kind of the wants, the things that you'd like to do. And then the last 20% should be either to pay down debt. And I'm not counting about the mortgage because I'll put that into the first category, and probably not the car, but other kind of debt. And then that 20% goes to paying down debt and savings. And think about it that way, and don't get too granular. I know I've done that myself in the past. And actually, one of my kids is just starting his first job. And I said to him, he was asking me about budget. I told him the 50, 30, 20. And he asked, what tool do you use? I said, well, you can use a lot of different tools. But the biggest advice I have to you is don't make it as granular as I did, because then it's going to become overwhelming to take care of it and to maintain it. So try to keep it simple. So just have those kind of broad categories and think of it that way. But that 50, 30, 20 is a good model to use.
Okay. So you're talking about life planning, and how do you manage when you're working with clients and their life plan doesn't fit their money? Like, you have to run into that. Like, I'm sure people have this grandiose idea of how they're going to spend the second half of their life, and it's like the budget and what's available doesn't match.
I think that so life planning, we start with kind of exploration. There's another acronym. It's EVOKE is the process. We start with exploration, talking about like what do you need to live your most fulfilling life? And then from there, we go into vision. And during vision, you're asked 3 questions. The first question should be pretty easy and fun to answer. Like, imagine that money was no object. You could do anything you wanted. What would you do and how would you live your life? Then the second question is sort of to bring you back in a little bit. This time, money is part of the equation. And you also go to the doctor and you get the unfortunate news that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. The good news is you're not ever going to feel sick. The bad news is you don't know when you're going to go. And then the third question becomes the really hard one. You go to the doctor and you find out today's the day. And now it's not what would you do? It's what did you not get to do and who did you not get to be? Though I will tell you, some people try to answer the what did you not get to do because they're kind of in that mode after the first 2. But through the course of that conversation, that process, which is me listening way more than I'm talking, I ask questions and I listen. I'm there to facilitate you thinking things through. It helps you identify those things that really matter to you, and those become the anchor of your plan. And if they really matter, it becomes a lot easier to figure out how to do those things. And so then you get rid of some of those things that don't have as much meaning to you.
Okay, that makes sense. I started thinking about things, and it is interesting, even just in talking with my kids as they get older, they have different desires. Like, they have different things that make them. You were talking about the coffee. My youngest is like, I have to have a job where I can go to Starbucks every single day. And I was like, well, I'm glad you realize you need to have a job to go to Starbucks every day, because the app that you're using on your phone is attached to my card, and that's not going to work for the rest of your life. But also my older daughter's like, that's such a waste of money. Why would you spend your money? Do you know how much money that is every year? And so it is true that everybody has different ideas of what's really, truly important to them. But what do you do when when you're having these plans and you're both not seeing eye to eye on what's really important?
So when that's happened, like, one of the questions that I ask is, what was money like in your house growing up? Because a lot of times that is the root of where your thought process come from and how you think about money. Like, I have a couple that I work with, and she's the financial person and he's not. Like, at one point he was in the military. During one of her first meetings, he said, Phil, there's countries that I can't go to because I'll be killed. And when you ask them, and so they have a low interest rate mortgage. She's like, I don't want to pay it off that fast because I'd rather invest and do other things. He's like, I want to pay it off now. I want to not have any debt. I want to go, ultimately, I want to live on a farm where we can take care of ourselves. And I asked him about, like, what was money like growing up? Well, for him, his family lived in this house. They moved out and they moved into another house, but they kept the first one. And his father lost his job. And when his father lost his job, the fact that they still had that first house, which they now owned free and clear, was allowed them to survive. Because they moved back there and they didn't have all those other expenses, and it allowed them to survive until Dad could get back on his feet. And her experience was very different. She's a financial person. She's like, I know I told my wife, like, if I can't make more over the long haul than our really low rate on our mortgage, I'm in the wrong business. So a lot of it depends, those type of things, exploring those things. And what is important about money to you is another good question to ask. And so I find for a lot of people, the two most common answers are security and freedom. And when you move from security to freedom, some of those views change. But going through and understanding that and having these money conversations, like I even tell, if you're a couple, like we talked about the idea up front that we don't talk about money, have a money date, right? Like this is, we're going to go over and talk about our finances, what our hopes and goals and dreams are, and what we'd like to accomplish. So I think that's a big part of it. Just sitting there and going through and figuring out those things that matter, because when we figure out what matters, a lot of the other stuff isn't nearly as important and we don't care.
It all goes back to our childhood.
Yes.
I feel like we're at the age, we're in an age of time where everything is going back to childhood. So,
but we can move past it at least.
Yes, we're growing from it. So that's good. Yeah. There's a lot to sit with in the life planning process. And so when you talk about becoming a life planner instead of just a financial analyst or a CPA, what about that aspect really spoke to you that you felt like you needed that to be part of what you're doing for people?
So I will tell you that when I started college, I went to Duke and I was at pre-med and I was a psychology major. So part of it's that, right? Because it kind of gets back to that psychological behavioral aspect of things. But the other thing is that my favorite part of what I do is getting to know my clients, understanding them, knowing what matters to them. Like I'm supposed to be a fiduciary, which means I'm supposed to make recommendations in your best interests. And if I've gone through your life plan, I have a really good idea when I'm making those recommendations that they are in your best interest because you've kind of told me what matters to you. And I think that I can add a lot more value. Look, investment management, like yes, I take a long-term approach, right? But that's not really where any advisor can add the most value because nobody can consistently outperform the market, whatever measure you want to use, right? But if I can help you live a more fulfilling life and more meaningful and help you do those things that really matter to you, I'm adding value. Like the tax planning I talked about, that's something that can separate. But just look, when you have a conversation, usually your favorite conversations are the ones where you talked a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Because somebody listened to us, somebody heard you. And I think that's an important part of it too, is that I give people the opportunity to talk things out, to be heard. Like that third part of the life planning process, it's obstacles. And during that, I ask you, like, okay, you told me that these are the things that you want to do. And it's who can help you with that? How are you going to do it? What are you going to do about it? And when, right? And I'll tell you, when I first started, like, oh, I don't like this part. But now it almost feels like I can see the wheels spinning inside somebody's head as they're sitting there thinking this through and figuring out what it is that they can do so that they can go and do these things that they want, so that they can overcome these obstacles that are in the way.
And it's interesting because in financial planning, it feels very calculated and numbers and the math that some of us hate. But when you add the life component into it, I mean, it would be for me, if this had been the conversation I had 20 years ago about financial planning, where it was more about my life and less about the numbers and what's in the bank, I'd probably be more inclined to have it.
That's exactly it. I mean, so after we ask those three questions, we put together, it's called a vision statement. And the whole purpose of that is George Kinder, it's the Kinder Institute of Life Planning that I went through this training with. He talks about we're trying to light a torch, right? We're trying to inspire you to go do those things. And I think it is really important. And like when I get a new client, I start with life planning. Unless there's sometimes somebody has something really urgent going on that they really need to figure out, and we'll do that first, but then we'll come back to the life planning. But my default mode is let's start with your life plan so that we can now, when we get to the numbers part, we know things that are going to be there. Like I have a client, she told me about this piece of jewelry that she had and another piece of jewelry that she had. They were from two relatives and she wanted to combine them into one. Like I found this out during the life plan. So I said, well, when we got to the life plan, she didn't have that as one of the things she wanted to do. I'm like, well, let's put that in there because you told me how important that was. I'm like, that makes a difference because now you're getting those things in there that have meaning.
Mm-hmm. It's an incentive too, to be sticking to the plan, because I'm sure you come across people that don't stick to their plan. And how do you help the people that aren't, they've created the life plan, they've got it all mapped out, and they're just not sticking to it?
Sometimes it's really hard because I will tell you that sometimes people are like, Phil, I don't really want to deal with any of this. I hired you. I trust you. Please go do it for me. But when they have those questions, like couples that I'm working with or individuals, it doesn't matter either way. We'll go through when we get to the numbers part and I'll say, all right, well, here's what you say you make, your income, and here's what you say you're spending. And it says that you have X amount left over. Do you really have that? And sometimes they don't. And so then it's like, do we want to go through and do an analysis of what you're spending on? Like, I don't intend to tell you how to spend your money because it's your money, it's not mine. But again, let's go back and tie it back to the life plan. And I think that's what really helps when people are struggling to say, go back and look, where are you spending your money? Like, do an audit. Like, there's an advisor to advisors that I follow, and I know him, and he says, like, he calls it a statement of financial purpose that he has. And like, it's not just finances, right? It's like, I want to spend time with family. I want to be outside. Then do a time audit. Where is he spending his time? Like, oh, well, I was watching ESPN for 10 hours this week. Yeah. Where is that in the spending time with your family and being outside? It's not. So those are the type of things. Or go through the money that you spent over the last month and find out where the 10 largest expenditures that you had are those things that matter to you. If they're not, then that's, like I remember I bought my first house. Before I got married, I bought a townhouse. And I didn't know if I could afford it. I was really nervous. I didn't know if it was something I could actually manage. So I would carry a piece of paper around with me. And I got really granular. Every penny that I spent, I wrote down. And then I put it in a spreadsheet. And this was way before I did life planning or any of that stuff. But when I looked at it, I knew that I could buy that house and I could afford that mortgage because I'm like, here's all the things that if times got tough that I could cut out. Doesn't mean I have to, but I knew that I could. And so it was kind of using some of those principles without going through the formal process, but just looking and saying, what is it that matters to me and what doesn't? Or what is it that I need versus right? If we go through those needs, wants, and then the savings part, if you go through that part of the budget, like in that wants, there might be things that can come out.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me and some people that I've talked to, there's like this moment of reckoning about this age of like, what were we buying the big house for? What were we buying the expensive cars for? Like, who was it for? Was it for us or was it for some lifestyle that we were all told we were supposed to attain? And then is it really aligned with what we actually value and what we want? And so if you're sitting in that, like I know personally, I'm sitting in that of like, what do I really value versus what do we have? And how do you start to reconcile that in a way that is financially responsible? Because like blowing your whole life up and like selling it all off and going and living in a yurt doesn't sound like the smartest thing to do. But how do you navigate that? Because there's a lot of women I talk to who are like, gosh, like I just want to unload the house that's so much work and unload the expensive cars that are a lot of money to maintain. And I just want to live a simple life. And how do you go about that without it costing you more than it needs to?
Sometimes it's harder when we're kind of simplifying, right? There's a really interesting book that I read, and he talked about the idea. I think he used this word for when you go into the store. He called these things gazingas, like the stuff that you see that you didn't really go in there with any intention to buy, right? But he said, think about how much money you make and how much you earn per hour. And then when you look at those gazingas, how many hours of work would it take you to buy that? And if you look at it that way, is it really worth it? Is it worth it to buy that, whatever it may be, for 5 hours of work? Maybe not, right? When it comes to simplifying, it does. I think it's got to be a more gradual process. You have to pull back. You can't just, like some people do, I understand, but to give it all up to go live in that yurt it's kind of hard, right?
Yeah.
But it's got to become a gradual process. Like if I think about my own evolution and what used to be important to me, what is now, like to me, life planning, the training, because I got life planned, it was eye-opening because it's really changed my perspective on a lot of things and has me thinking differently. Like, you know, when my kids say, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? What do you want from your birthday? My usual answer is, let's go to lunch or let's go to dinner. I just want time with you. Mm-hmm. That's what really matters to me. I don't care about the other stuff. Let's just go out and spend some time together. You know, my two oldest boys like to disc golf, you know, frisbee golf, and I go with them, and I don't beat them, and I don't really care. I feel blessed that I have two kids that are in their 20s that are okay with Dad going to play disc golf with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Last night, actually, my daughters were going to go get something to eat, and they were trying to get me to go. I'm like, I'm tired. Like, I'm really good. I don't want to go out. I'm tired. And they're like, no, come with us. So we went out, and then it was, well, I need to go to Target for something. And I'm watching them like just randomly enjoy each other's company. And then we went for ice cream, and it was like this whole evening evolved because we got to spend time together. And my oldest said, wasn't it fun, Mom, that we took you along on our evening? Like I was invited finally. Like, I felt like I was in the in crowd, and I want that forever. And my birthday is this Thursday. And she asked me, what do you want for your birthday? And I was like, just say something nice in a card and let's go to dinner. Like, even a piece of paper, just like write something nice on a piece of paper with your own hand. Do not text it to me with a bunch of emojis. Like, use pen and paper. Doesn't have to be fancy, but and that is not what I would have probably said in my 20s.
Yeah, it's funny. A similar source. I have a client that I worked on the life plan with, and as we're going through the process, and she said, she doesn't want to spend more time with her kids, and they want to write, and they don't always do it. And she said, so one of her sons came home and said, Mom, let's play a game. And she looked at the clock, and it was like close to her bedtime. And she said, normally I would have gone to bed, but I remembered the work that we did and how I said that was important. And so I sat down and I played the game, and then their other son came home and he joined in, and he said, we had such a wonderful time. Right. And so you start to think differently, and it really makes a difference because you get those experiences. Yeah.
So it sounds like we all need to life plan, basically, is what you're saying. Because I think it helps you take stock of what's really important anyway. And to be able to put that on pen and paper almost makes it, you're manifesting of sorts.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because it gets us to think about stuff that we don't. And so I remember some people said life planning is about regret. And I say, no, it's about avoiding regret. Because if we can identify these things that are important to us now, we can start to do them and not get to the end of life with regret about not having done them. Or I told you, like, I want to start this scholarship. Isn't it better that I start it now while I can see the impact and the effect that it can have than if I wait and leave it? Sure, people still benefit. And yeah, I get to see that. So that makes me feel good. So you can say I'm being a little selfish, but I'm doing it for longer and I'm helping more people. And why shouldn't I get to see the benefit of it? Why do I have to wait?
That's a great place that's actually a great place to end our conversation, honestly. and to tell you the truth, I was thinking to myself, I hate talking about money. I find it boring. So I appreciate that we've had a lovely conversation. I've learned a lot. I've asked some questions that I'm going to keep asking myself. I hope other people, it's sparked a conversation in their own minds whenever they're listening, if they're doing their laundry or driving the car, whatever. So if people are interested in working with you in particular, where do they find you?
So the name of my firm is Apprise Wealth Management. So the website is Apprise Wealth, APPRISE wealth.com. So you can go there. I don't charge anybody anything to have a conversation, because to work with a financial advisor, it's got to be the right relationship for you and for the advisor, for both. So you can go there. I'm also you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. Those are the easiest places to find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining Women Mastering Midlife today. And I'll have everything in the show notes for everyone if they want to reach out and find you. And so no TikTok dances is what you're saying, though.
I tried that for a little while, but it just wasn't for me.
I understand. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women Mastering Midlife. If something you heard today resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with a friend who might need a little extra support on her midlife journey. Remember, small changes can make a big difference, and you don't have to navigate this transition alone. We will be back next week with more expert guidance and compassionate conversations to help empower you to master midlife on your terms. Until then, you can find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife, or come connect with me directly at Miss Victoria Bird. And you're looking for deeper connection and support, be sure to join us in the Women Mastering Midlife community. We'd love to continue the conversation with you there. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review this podcast. It helps us reach more amazing women mastering midlife just like you. You'll find all the links from today's episode and ways to connect in the show notes below. See you next time.